Hi, welcome to NDE TV. I'm Peggy Robinson. Today's guest is Dianna Good Sky. Awesome name.
Thank
So
you.
now you're from families from the Chippewa tribe, right?
Chippewa, that's the treaty name. Ojibwe is where it came from, but we call ourselves Anishinaabe.
Okay. Where would you like to start today? Because actually your story is about your dad's near-death experience and
Correct.
the spirituality through that.
Yeah. And when I first heard the story, I have to tell a little bit about the background, because when I first heard what he said happened to him, I had no idea that it was an NDE, and neither did he. And to this day, actually, neither does he. He thinks he just had an amazing dream. So, and you know who my dad is, because people like to doubt things, and I've had a couple of people say, well, he must have known what to say, or it's not an NDE because this and that, and just kind of refuting everything. But this is what I know. I know that what happened to him and the results with what happened afterwards were life-changing on so many ways, that even though I wasn't familiar with an NDE when he first told me the story, or even years later, I have definitely come to conclude that he had that, even though he wasn't in a hospital to get it recorded, and because his was different. His was at home, and I want to state that because I think that NDEs have there's a lot more documentation out there nowadays than there ever was, but it didn't always exist, and
Right.
especially in a community like reservation, a tribal community. I mean, spiritual things happen, right? And they typically may not have assigned a name to it. So I felt the need to say that, because I have had people say to me that that wasn't an NDE, and
I have noticed a lot of NDEers have some Indian blood, some genealogy, and myself included. And I've also noticed child abuse seems to be a factor too, to be an NDEer.
That is extremely interesting. I did not know that. Maybe I'd like for you to point me into where you saw that, because I've done.
It's just experience. Like the more people I talk to, the more stories I hear. I notice a link that seems to be a lot of them were abused as children.
Interesting.
And I feel personally that God kind of adopts us. Abused children, unloved children. I feel he kind of adopts us and kind of gives us a leg up, maybe an extra strong guardian angel or something, or, and the near-death experience, I think, is part of that support system, in my feeling.
Well, that wouldn't, that's in alignment with what I think. I had never thought of that until you said it, but that would make sense to me, especially given all the, especially given the things especially nowadays, there's more and more. But again, we just didn't have the documentation, the ability to have such good communication with so many people. But so I wanted to state that right out the get-go. But it was my dad's experience, and for me though, growing up, I mean, he was an alcoholic, and he was also in the military. But we had so we traveled to some places, and the only thing that he did, the best thing he ever did for us, they would take us home every racing season, which is a significant cultural event in Nut Lake, Minnesota. We have the world's finest wild rice. I'll say that to the end and argue that with anybody. But it's the world's finest wild rice.
All right.
So our wild rice is beautiful and amazing, and our people were brought to Nut Lake because of the wild rice. It was a prophecy to get to the food where the food grows on water, and that's wild rice. And we still collect it to this day in the traditional methods. And so he would bring us home. Got to shut my phone off. Excuse me. He would bring us home every September for ricing season.
Is there a brand they sell, like a name brand, or?
Net Lake Wild Rice. It's on the website. It's
Okay.
called boys.com.
Okay.
But anyway, so that was our connection to culture growing up. Even though we were in the military, it would take us home for those 30 days, and we would just, you know, have my friends commenting how it's a good thing I'm not on video with my crazy hair. Oh, and it's her clothing.
But you are on video.
Oh, well, I mean, not being recorded. Yeah, not on national television or anything.
Yeah, maybe someday.
Maybe someday. Well, yes, someday. But anyway, so so that was the piece of culture that we had to the past. That's where we learned what we could learn while we were home. And any other time, as far as learning the culture, because he's full-blooded and he's a fluent speaker. My mom was not a fluent speaker. Her grandparents, or her parents, did not teach her the language, even though her mom was full and her dad was half. They were survivors of boarding schools, and my grandmother.
That's bad, right? I mean.
Oh yeah. I have three. So my grandmother and grandfather on my mom's side, and my grandfather on my dad's side are all boarding school survivors.
I've watched movies on that. It breaks my heart.
Oh yeah, it's amazing. That's actually my next book. It's going to be about that, touching that subject, the legacy of the boarding school Indians, and so I'm working on now. But yeah, so because of my grandmother's, what happened there, she refused to allow my grandfather to teach the children the language. And my dad's side was different in that it was my dad's dad who went to the boarding school, but his mother, they were able to hide in the woods and they never had to go because they were hiding and never got caught, because, you know, these kids would get caught to go and they'd run away. My grandfather ran away 3 times from the boarding school. And but anyway, so my mom's side, she didn't know the language. And my dad's side, it did, because when my grandpa married my grandma on my dad's side, they had he was Medewan, her father was a Medewan society, and they had a very strong connection to the culture and all of that. So
why didn't they want the kids to learn the language?
Because that's what happened to them
Stigma?
at the boarding. No, they were beaten if they spoke the language, and so that's what they learned, that speaking the language was bad. They told them, the nuns told them, they told my grandmother, if you speak the language, you're going to get well, they beat them for one, but they said, because if you go out and speak the language, they'll know that you're Chippewa, and the Sioux Indians are gonna beat you up. But so what, she had this dual message here. So the nuns were telling her that by beating her when they spoke the language, the nuns were saying, we white people don't want you to speak the language. And then they were saying to them, but if you speak it, the Sioux are going to hear you and they're going to beat you up, because there was a natural Sioux versus Ojibwe fight, you know.
So when they had their own children, were out of that school, had their own family, they still had that fear. Don't teach our kids that.
Fear, and I asked my grandmother point blank when she was in her 60s, and I asked her about her boarding school experience, and I was gentle, of course, because she was very quiet. They never talked about it. Never talked about it. But when I asked her point blank, because I just wanted to know, because I also knew that my mom and her siblings resented the fact that they didn't know the language. They did not like, because so few families spoke it, but they wanted to. They knew what it meant. They knew that it meant such a large disconnect from the culture. So and they really, my mom didn't say I hate my mother, but my auntie said I hated her for that. And very strong emotions attached, because it's a big deal. So when I asked her, when she was in her early 60s, I was actually doing an interview, I was recording it, And she told me about the boarding schools, and she told me what they did. She told me about those beatings. She told me how she had to, for punishments, they would have a chair and put a hard P down, and they had to kneel on the P's that was in between the bones of their knees, so that the P was in between the bones of their kneecap as they're kneeling, and they had to kneel there for hours, and things like that. So it wasn't a good conversation for her to have. I could tell she was getting uncomfortable. So I didn't want to stop too long with the kind of punishments, because she was clearly not happy. But I was so proud of her for even saying what she did, because it was so hard to talk about. But then when I asked her about the language, I said, but Grandma, I said, do you think, like today, now that so much time has passed, do you think today that it was good? She said the words, it was good of them to make us learn English, is what she said. And I was kind of floored. I said, well, I understand that we had to learn English, but why couldn't they allow you to speak your language? And she got quiet. And I said, you see, if they would have just taught you English and allowed you to keep the language, I said, I would be speaking Ojibwe to you right now. And so would my kids. And she got really, really quiet. And she had this habit of taking this pencil and like twirling it on the table. So she was staring at the pencil for the longest time. And I said, well, Grandma, just, do you think where you are right now, do you think it was still good of them to beat the language out of you? And she was like, after a long, long pause, she looked up at me and she said, yes. And I was floored. I was so floored, because she still, at that age, it was so ingrained in her that she just still thought so, even knowing everything that had happened, So, but my dad's side was different. When my dad's dad married his mom, they were very traditional, and there was no way in the world that they were going to raise their children not traditionally, So they had the distinct advantage, though, of being able to learn English from their father and learning Anishinaabe from their mom, and all the traditions from the grandfather on the mom's side, and also the white man's tradition on the dad's side. So they were probably one of the few families that got the best. They were able
to both worlds.
Yeah, they got to learn the new, which is, it's so sad. It's like, in retrospect, you think, well, golly, how could anyone not think that would be a good idea? Have both, but here we are. Yeah. So he grew up with all the traditions, and his grandfather was big on teaching him not only the language, but herbalism and medicines and things like that. So plants. And
my grandmother, that her family told everyone they were Black Dutch. That was code for Indian, because it was too disgraceful to say Indian.
Yeah. I just met a woman read my book, and you could tell she was in tears typing this, because she had just found out that her Mexican father was actually Native, and that they had to hide it. Or no, the Native father claimed he was Mexican, so they thought they were Mexican for years. Just found out he was Native because he was too afraid to call himself a Native. That did happen. A lot of that stuff has happened,
And I guess I'm politically incorrect by saying Indian. They say Native now, right? I don't know.
Some people do. Some people, I don't. I grew up being called Indian, and I just looked at it. I don't look at it as anything except a word. I'm fine. And I say white people. So,
I have an aunt that's in her 80s, and she heard that I mentioned in my book that my mom told me that my grandmother's mother was Indian Squaw, and I have the proof, because I got newspaper clippings about my great grandmother, And it listed right in the newspaper, said she was an Indian squaw. That's what they called her. But my cousin had my aunt read my book, and she's like upset. She says, no, they weren't Indian. They were Black Dutch. And my mom, I told my mom, she said that, and she says Black Dutch is what they called Indians because they did not want to admit they were Indians. So they called them Black Dutch, and people bought it. To this day, and in her 80s, she still thinks, no, they're Black Dutch. There's no such thing as Black Dutch.
Yeah, then ingraining. I will say the word squaw is offensive because now that we know the word, what it means, squaw is very offensive because it has been determined, just like I said, we call ourselves Anishinaabe, but others call our tribe Ojibwe, but the treaties are written in Chippewa. That's a bastardization of translation. Squaw came from a word that describes a woman's body part.
Oh, I didn't know that. See, I've been like proud on my great grandma was an Indian squaw, it says right here, it's newspaper flipping, look, and here's the picture of her gravesite. That's her name. That's my grandma. And so I don't know that. I don't know
that one because that one is offensive, very clearly offensive based on now that you know the origin of it.
Yeah, I didn't know that at all. I mean, I knew people call that them in a derogatory manner. For them, that was but for me, it was a sense of pride. My grandma, was this, and because my mom always said it when I was growing up. That her mother's mother was Indian squaw. I always heard it.
Oh yeah,
never thought of it as a bad thing.
Yeah,
but I can see what you mean. It was. I did know people said it as a derogatory thing.
Because it's actually the description of a woman's anatomy.
Okay.
So, so now that you know that. That's, I mean, that's.
So the proper thing is to say that she was Native American.
Or she was an Indian lady, Indian girl.
Okay.
Yeah, Indian, Native American. I think the most appropriate, politically correct is Native American. I know the intent with Indian. See, and that's the intention is key, right? The intent with Indian was they were trying to put a label on a people based on the information. I thought, did I mess up on the?
It's 1 to 1. You put 12 cups of water and probably 5 scoops of coffee.
Oh, it's 1 to 1. Wow,
1 scoop to 1 cup, so it tastes like hot water.
Sorry. I was thinking, how come she can't come down here first and make coffee? I don't make coffee very often. But anyway, so the intent when they named the Indian was because they thought that it was a misunderstanding. So they were naming a people based on what they thought. So the intention is different from, I'm going to call these people the worst thing that I can think of to call them as a derogatory term and name that name. And so the intent is different. And once you understand that the intent was different as well, then you decide, well, am I good with that intention? Do I like being called that? So that's why I'm okay with the word Indian, because the intention was, they were just stupid. They made a mistake. The other word, squaw, is very much intentionally derogatory from the get-go. So anyway, back to this. So with the culture though, growing up, remember Dad was in the Navy, so he was stationed away from the reservation. And when he, only when he would get drunk would he want to teach us things. My mom couldn't teach us many things because she didn't know many things besides the language. Because I had Medewan, that's the medicine society on both, in my tribe. I had Medewan grandfathers on both sides, but my grandfather on my mom's side, my maternal grandfather, he just basically listened to my grandmother. She just forbade him from teaching the kids anything. And she became a born-again Christian, and she wanted those kids to be Christian, And then my dad's side kept teaching him everything and had no problem. Well, but my mom though, these two are married, so second generation. And my mom's telling him kind of the same thing, not because she didn't want him to teach, but it was because she didn't know anything. And then he was busy unless he was, I mean, he just, we're living everyday life around the country and until he got drunk. And then when he would get drunk, that's when he would want to teach us things.
You suppose that's his PTSD? I think I read something about PTSD yet that
Oh, yeah.
brought up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
plus in the book, you'll see other reasons for childhood trauma. Yeah. So, so yeah, I don't want to learn from him. I mean, it was terrible. Sometimes he'd come in there in the middle of the night. We had paydays for 2 reasons, you know, I mean, we no food in the house, and then he'd be coming, waking us up drunk. It's like, it was a miserable time, you know? And then he'd sit there and try to make us, sometimes he'd put music on and try to tell us to dance, and it was awful. It was awful. So I had this, personally, I had this I don't want to be an Indian. If that's what being an Indian is, I don't want to be an Indian, you know? Sheesh. And so his drinking got bad and continued to get bad. And then mom would kick him out, and then he'd try to come back, kick him out. It was this big cycle. Finally, she left him and we moved back to the reservation. And I was 12 or 13 when we moved back. And he didn't continue his military career. He got out, he moved back. And of course, all us kids are like, oh, great. Because now, even though he wasn't in the house, he had access to more drinking, no responsibilities, and just, it was so embarrassing for us. I was a teenager. It was embarrassing, you know? And
Did he go from functional alcoholic to full blown?
oh yeah, big time. And sometimes I'd see him walking down the road knowing he had pissy pants and knowing he stunk, and it's just, he's walking on the side of the road, and I would just hope that he didn't know that I was driving by and was not going to stop to talk to him, you know, one of those kind of things. And but then, so when I was, you read the introduction, so you know how that happened. The day that he told me, the day I told him I was joining the Navy, which was a lifelong, that was a decision I made when I was 12. So we must have moved back when I was 13, because when I was 12 is when I made that decision where we were in the Great Lakes base. Yeah, I saw a woman in uniform. That's the day I decided to join the Navy. So we must have moved back when I was 12 or 13. And so I'd signed up and I'd gone in that bar and I'd asked him, I had to tell him, I really tried to miss him, but he saw me because, you know, I have to walk to the bathroom. And he yelled and he called me over there. And then I told him that I was going to join the Navy. And then he was very surprised. And then he said, okay, if you join the Navy, I'll sober up. How many times have parents said, I'll sober up? You know, so he's sitting at the bar, he's taking a drink of his beer. Oh, you know, babe, I'll sober up. I'm thinking, sure you will. Well,
Can't make a deal with the drunk.
Right. Can't, even though, you know, as children, we want the best of our family, right? We want to believe our parents because we love our parents no matter what. So I struggled with hope to no way. And then I kind of let it go after 20 minutes or so. But when I called my mom in boot camp, and she said that he had checked himself in to the Muskowsen. It was a native treatment center. And I was kind of surprised. My first thought was, oh, he remembered his promise, you know? And I was like, wow. But then I kind of, you know, it was boot camp. So I went back to doing what I needed to do. And when I got out of boot camp and went to school, I went to 2 schools first. And each time I called, he was still sober. So it was a long time. And when I got home finally, his hair was white. And now he had some gray before I had left for boot camp, which I'd left in January. And I got home in September. And when I saw him, I was really floored because by this time he'd been sober for must have been 7 months because he checked himself in March. So in 7 months, his head turned completely white. And he had he was very different. He had such a different demeanor, and he was calm. He was at ease. it was just very different. I was sitting there going, who the heck, what the heck happened here? You know, because it was such a different man in many ways. And he was making himself a healthy breakfast instead of eating just, you know, well, before it was only vodka donuts or something like that, you know, just, and here he was making himself some eggs, and he had gone hunting and had some deer meat. And he had a job, he had a real job, you know, so there was a lot going on. And I finally said to him, I said, Dad, I said, because for me, in my mind, remember, I thought he just made his promise to me. And I thought he remembered his promise. So what I said to it, I said something like, I'm glad you kept your promise, or something like that, you know, something kind of fairly benign, but still getting the conversation going to that. And he says, he just looked at me. He just kind of looked at me like he didn't know he wasn't sure what I was talking about. And I said, Dad, you're sober. You've been sober for a long time. This is the longest I've seen you sober in a long time. He goes, yeah. And he was kind of contemplative. And it just seemed like he wasn't sure what to say. So I said, well, how did it happen? Me? I'm an 18-year-old girl still fishing for him to say, I fulfilled my promise.
Yeah.
You know, well, how did it happen? What happened? And he said he wasn't sure he wanted to tell me. And I said, why not? Just tell me. It's okay. It's just me. And so he told me about what happened to him. But listen, when he started talking, I truly said to myself, oh my God, I think he's smoking marijuana now or doing some other drugs. Oh, this is so unreal what he was talking about, you know? And but then I listened. I kind of settled in and listened to the story. But more importantly, I was watching him. I was watching him relive what he had gone through. And I was just like, you know, begin to kind of relax into it myself. And so he started off with him being so sick after a binge, and there were lots of people in the room, in this little one room apartment kind of like thing. It was an elderly unit, and he said there were just alcohol bottles everywhere, and he was so sick, and he wanted everybody to leave because he just felt so sick. He wasn't sure if he could eat, or he wasn't sure what he could do, but he had to lay down because he was just feeling bad. And then but when he started feeling bad, he would drink more to try to feel better. And that really backfired on him, because after 3 days of trying that, it just wasn't working. So he needed to, you know, felt like he needed to lay down, but he was doing some self-reflection, you know. I mean, he saw himself in the mirror, he didn't recognize himself in the mirror. And he was just over it. He said, I was done. He literally wanted to die. He was just done with all of it, because he felt a lot of hatred, self-hatred in that, because, you know, who am I? I used to be an honorable man. I used to be a good man. And who am I now? And what am I doing? You know? And so those were the kind of thoughts that were going through his mind as he went to lay down. And he said he went to lay down, and it didn't take very long at all for him to feel like he fell asleep. And he was so grateful, because he was happy because he was not in pain anymore. And it happened fairly quickly. He said he was not in pain anymore. And it was so I didn't at the time, but later on I would say to him, Dad, do you realize that what you were saying or thinking was that you were glad that the pain was gone, but it didn't take you long to go to sleep? So you were kind of aware that you were asleep and feeling better. You know, he doesn't, I don't think he even grasps that too well, like I do.
Right. I get it.
I'm like, Yeah. And he says, he just kind of looked at me. I said, well, then what happened? And he said, then he noticed himself floating, feeling like this he felt so good. He was so happy that he felt so good. And he started floating. And then he realized that he was floating above his body. He could see a skinny body on the bed looking awful. And he said, is that me? You know, because it was a little bit of a discombobulation going on there, you know, and it's what's going on in my head. So he saw himself, and then he noticed the floating feeling. And then there were two entities, no faces, no actual bodies, but he knew that there were two entities. He knew they knew him. One, he feels, was his paternal grandfather, the one who taught him all the herbal things and the traditional ways. The other one, to this day, he has no idea who he was, but he felt like he knew him as well. So there was like a recognition, even though, and this was what happens in the spiritual world, right? You don't always get faces or forms. You get, I don't even know how to say that. It's like, but you know, these entities are who they are. And so that's what he saw. And they said that they were going to help him. They said they were going to help him get where he needed to go. And so they basically took him and showed him places and showed him some things. First off, because right there they went to his funeral, and he said that, you know, it was also confusing, but more confusing things happened in his logical mind as they went along, because, you know, they literally went through the walls of the community center where there was a wake being held, and it was him in the coffin, and the people were there, and so many people were there. And he saw his whole family, he saw his kids, he saw his ex-wife, because my parents had divorced by this time. And he loved saying how, you know, when they went over to the graveside, this is how my dad talked. He said, even your old mom was crying. So he recognized that his ex-wife was crying at his grave. You know, he got a kick out of that. But so he saw all of that, everything happening on the reservation there, his death, his burial, or his wake, his burial. Saw the people sad, especially the children, and then he started to feel sad. But he said he just wanted to tell us that he was okay. He just wanted, he said, and he asked, could he tell us that he was okay, and that he was good, and he didn't have any pain, and he was good. And they basically said no. Of course, talking, like, no words, all appear, but talking nonetheless, you know, communicating nonetheless. And for him, all in Ojibwe. All the dialogue that happened in this was all in Ojibwe. No English was spoken. So, so then they take him, and they said it's time, and he said he didn't want to go. He wanted to. He didn't think we were doing all right, and he wanted to make sure we were doing all right. And he said he really didn't he wanted to make sure we were doing all right first, and then they said, but well, you have to. This is the way, and it was kind of like a door. It was basically a barrier between this world and whatever was beyond the door. And he also didn't know where he was going. He still didn't understand what was going on. It was very confusing for him. And so they left, and so he had to go through. And when he did that, he was traveling and not exactly sure where to go and how to do it, but he heard the stories about, in Native circles, most tribes have their way to get to where they get guided, you know. And so he knew the stories. He knew how it takes 4 days to get to where you're going, and the certain things you're going to come across. So he knew those stories. So he was starting to see some of those things, and he was starting to see, you know, like the bridge and the bridge across over that had he said there were so many faces coming at him, and they were full of angst and full of despair, and it was really a bad feeling that he got. And the first time he told me this story, he thought that they were people that were stuck between the spiritual world and the human world. They were stuck because for whatever reason, either they committed suicide. In our culture, if you commit suicide, you're not allowed to go to the next, you have to be guided in when it is your time. So he thought it was those people that might have things who had done really bad things, that they were, because the faces were so terribly, the souls, if you will, were so contorted and all that. And so he knew there were people that they weren't good, they were not happy. But in later years, when we would talk about this, he said, I used to think that those are all people who'd done bad things, but now I know that they were all me, and they were all different versions of me that had done bad things. And I had to face each of them as I was crossing that bridge. And I was like, wow, okay.
Sounds
And
like
then-
we're many souls,
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah. So, or pieces of our soul that are, many souls, pieces of us that aren't good with us, And then when he got to a raging river, and across the river was a huge, huge white dog. And he knew the dog was supposed to bring him across. The dog knew he was supposed to bring him across, but he wouldn't come and get him. There's no way he could have walked through that raging river. He knew that the current was too strong, and there's no way he could get across. He knew he had to get across, but he knew the dog wasn't going to get him. So he sat there and he didn't know what to do or say. And he said, there's no time or space, but it seemed like a long time. He said that it seemed like I was there for a long time, even though I'm not sure how long I was there. It's pretty much how he said it. And he says, finally he realized that I had to ask for forgiveness. I had to admit that I'd done some pretty bad things in my life, especially my junk life. And I had to ask for forgiveness. So I asked the dog to forgive me, because I needed forgiveness. And as soon as he did that, the dog got up, came across and got him. He crawled on his back, and then he went across the water. And then when he gets there, he's floating again, and there are people he's seeing all the faces of those who have gone before him, and they're all just nodding at him. And he's hearing his childhood nickname in Indian, of course, again, no English at this whole journey. And so they're talking to him in Indian, basically saying, Wajape is here, Wajape is here, of course he says it in Indian, but and then they were happy to see him. They nod their heads like, he's here. But then it opened up, and there was it was like a big, I don't want to say field, but it was where it was kind of like a closed thing where he could see his family members on either side as he was going through like this tunnel type thing. Once that ended, it opened up, and there was a dining table with a man with full white hair all the way to the ground, no facial features, but white hair all the way to the ground, in the middle. And then he had some like helpers, is what Dad said, helpers on the side. And he walked him up. He got up there, and the man said to him in Indian, what are you doing here, my son? My dad said, I don't even know where I'm at. I don't know what I'm doing here. And he said, your job isn't done. You have to go back. This isn't your time. Your job isn't done. And Dad was like, it's so confusing for him, and he says, I don't want to go back. I feel good here. I don't want to go back. I don't want to be sick. He didn't want any of the same stuff as before. And the man just said, It's not your time. You'll come back when you're ready. You have a lot of work to do. You have a lot of people you need to help. And you need to go back. Dad said he knew he had to listen. So he turned around and did the journey back. And this time he took, he knew what roads to take automatically. And then, according to him, his dream ended and he woke up.
What was that last part? Mended.
His dream ended and he woke
Dream
up.
ended. Okay.
Uh-huh.
But he became sober after that, I assume? That was the change?
So when he woke up and he realized where he was, back in his, and he'll say this too, back in my human body, even though he doesn't, he's older, right? So I was back in my human body. He said, and I felt like shit again. And, but I knew what I needed to do. I knew that in order to do the only thing I knew that I need to do was sober up. I wasn't sure what he meant when he said I have a job to do and that I had people to help. I did not understand that, but I knew I couldn't do it without being sober. So he slowly got up and he went to the bathroom, and then he walked right across the street from the elderly unit is the driver for the chemical dependency program. So he said, and he walked out and he says, and you know what? He said, when I came into the house, this stick wasn't there, but there was a big walking stick that was right outside my door when I got up that morning. And I used that to help walk because he could barely stand. So he used that to basically make his way across the street. And so he couldn't crawl up the steps by himself there's only 3 steps, but he just wasn't strong enough. And so he managed to use that stick to touch the door. And Axel came at the door, and Axel opened up the door and said, I am looking at death. and Dad said, he said, and he just looked up at him, kind of gave a little half smile as best he could muster. And so Axel came down and helped him in. And then he told him he's ready to get sober. And Axel told him, you said this before, but this time I believe you. I believe you. And gave him something to eat. He ate like a piece of bread and butter or something like that. And he wanted to throw it up, of course, but then he had a cup of tea, and he felt, and he knew he was going to need some money. So he felt a little better, and he wobbled up. My mom's work was right behind his elderly unit. It's all right here. All these buildings are right here. So he goes to see my mom looking like that and sits down at her desk, and he says he's checking himself into treatment, and could he borrow $50? And Mom looked at him and said, I know I'm never going to get any money back, but what I see from you today, I think you might be serious this time. And so they knew right away that things were different, right? And so, yeah, what he ultimately ended up doing was, besides but let me go back to the story. So as he's telling me the story and everything, and I was like, wow, Dad, that's awesome. So this was like the fall of 1980. I said, that is really amazing. And of course, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, how long is this going to last? Just history. But then he says, they tell us in Alcoholics Anonymous, we're not supposed to say this, but I know I'll never. Oh, they tell us in Alcoholics Anonymous that to not say that we're never going to drink again. But he looked right at me and he said, but I know I'm never going to drink again. And that was 1980. My dad has never drank again.
This is like a native Christmas carol story,
Yeah, it is. Yeah, because what he ended up doing was, thanks to him, he ended up very shortly after that getting a job as a teacher, as a cultural teacher. Through that position, he was able to bring the language, help bring the dance, because he had other visions, you see, on top of, which are in the book, but bringing the dancing back, bringing the regalia back, bringing the just the culture overall. He also formed excellent relationships with the churches up there, which some of the natives still have a hard time with that because the churches did so much damage to the reservations. But that is at a very high level of spirituality and understands things and is trying to help others get to the level of spirituality. And so he's mended the cultural bridges up there. I mean, it's crazy. He became the first teacher in the state of Minnesota to get a certified teacher, get a teacher certificate without a college degree. He ended up teaching elementary schools, high schools, and colleges. He used to travel around in colleges everywhere and just to talk.
What was he teaching?
Culture, language, language.
Awesome. It's awesome.
Yeah, and so he started bringing ceremonies back, ceremonies that were banned due to the Indian Religious Act of the certain administrations. The Indian Religious Acts prevented natives from, praying and dancing and all that. So a lot of those were hidden. And so he brought back, he got a drum group, got kids around the drum again, and just really, and teaching them, taking them out into the woods, just bringing the whole parts of the culture back, not just the language, how to go hunting, how to skin a deer, how to store rice, how to pick blueberries, how to tap maple sugar. I mean, all of that.
Is he still alive?
Yeah.
Has he read your book?
Oh yeah. He's 80, and he's going to be 80 February 5th. So we're planning a big party for him up there in Minnesota. I'm going to actually welcome everybody who wants to come because he is 80. and when you read the book, you can see what a contribution he has made. You can see how he changed the course of our reservation.
And you contributed to the near-death experience that he's not calling the near-death experience, but
right. I definitely, and he does too. He just doesn't call it a near-death experience because he doesn't know what that is. He just
does he still call it a dream?
Yeah, he just calls it. He just thinks he had this amazing, realistic dream.
Yeah, I mean, the whole thing of seeing his funeral, and it just made me think of the Christmas Carol. And at one point in time, I was talking about my NDE for the umpteenth time, and all of a sudden, I seen the connection to the Christmas Carol. I was like, wait a minute, and I went forward in time, and things in this. Like, I think the person that wrote that must have had some near-death experience.
And it's so funny. I didn't connect those dots myself either until a Christmas way later. I was like, oh my gosh, Charles Dickens must have had an NDE. But because I didn't know it was called an NDE either, or even until probably so Dad told me this in 1980. I didn't hear the words NDE until probably, or the word, let's see, what year was that? 2012. Just wasn't in my circle.
A lot of us really didn't until around then. Even this had near-death experiences. We just went around, didn't know what that was called, didn't know what it was, didn't know other people had them.
Yeah, and I think if you've read Black Elk Speaks, which is an amazing book, I think there's he definitely was spiritually connected, and I don't know if it was through an NDE because it doesn't name a particular thing that happened, except when he was young, he would see things. But natives have visions and pay attention. We all have visions. It's natives are more likely to have to be in tune with their visions. You know what I mean? And the only reason that, matter of fact, I submitted a paper with this story as an NDE in college because I went to college later, and I got a D on the paper because I couldn't prove the NDE part, because he didn't legally die, he wasn't on machines, couldn't be monitored. But I'm like, okay, well.
It's actually rare to have those qualifications, and
right.
We still consider things NDEs, without those qualifications of monitored, somebody actually saw the heart stop, and that's actually rare.
Yeah, so it's like, I wasn't happy, but I just let it go. But yeah, so that's his experience, and we've all learned so much from him and all that, and he wouldn't let me tell the story for the longest time because he thought it was a dream, and because actually I told him that it was I told him what it was, and he just kind of looks at me like, okay, babe, whatever. But when I was trying to say, Dad, you really need to share your story because I really believe that this will help a lot of people. It gives people hope, and it gives people help when you can give people.
Has he
And
been filmed telling his story?
No, no, but that's on my list of things to do. I want this book. Once you read the book, you'll see that it would make a very good movie, actually. And things that he's done, because he's a healer. He's gone on to save so many lives.
Yeah.
And
I would do with him what I'm doing with you right now, send him a Zoom link, sit in front of a camera and say, Dad, just tell me the story. And upload to YouTube.
The problem with that, because I've got a pretty big Facebook presence. The problem with my dad is he is getting older, and the things he says sometimes are not like, I'll give you an example. When COVID hit, we were discussing ahead of time because he knew what to do to help us with COVID, right? So I wanted for him to film it, and I wanted him to do it. So he's telling what he's saying. So everybody's in lockdown, and he's saying what they need to do. And what they need to do is they need to go to the store, and they need to buy some tobacco, and they need to go this, and they need to go that. I'm like, Dad, I said, they're in lockdown. They can't do it in COVID. And he yelled, he said, if they wanted to do it, they'll figure it out. They'll get to the store. And I'm just like, okay, I can't put him on anymore.
So basically he's saying we need to start growing our own things. And so, because they're not going to be there to buy.
No, basically what he's saying is screw the rules, go out and buy it because I said you needed it.
Like we all need tobacco.
Because he's 79 years old at the time, or 78. He's used to getting what he wants. But that's why, so I filter, I record stories with him, and I post them occasionally on Warrior Spirit Rising is his book page, and I'll do some things on there with him. But I record now instead of going live because of that. And I noticed too that, especially since the book came out, because he's kind of a celebrity. He's always been. He's been in National Geographic. He's one of the most written about men in Minnesota newspapers and all of that. So he's kind of a celebrity anyway. But
what's that about National Geographic? I didn't catch it.
Yeah, he's been in National Geographic a couple times, both for ricing and for duck hunting.
Duck hunting and ricing, huh?
Yeah. So he's a fairly a little celebrity, but I noticed since the book came out, he's telling people now he can cure cancer. Now, can he cure cancer? He probably can, but the problem is he can't say that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
I've heard people say it on my podcast even a couple times. One was with marijuana and another with her healing power or something,
And he would definitely tell you that. He would definitely say he believes it. And like I said, and I know he's done a lot of good work, but when you're in this arena, we know what you should say and shouldn't say, rather. He doesn't have any filter when it comes to that, so that's why I don't, because I wanted him to be with me. I wanted to take him on book tours and stuff with me. And COVID hit, we couldn't, but after he started saying things like that, because there's a story right after the introduction of the book is a story about how he saved this young man's life. And he did save his life after the doctors gave up on him. And I know that. But then he said that they called him in, the doctors called him in, and they wanted to give him the medicine, and he wouldn't do it. But they started calling him doctor. They never started calling him doctor.
So how did you go from being in the Navy to end up becoming an author?
my dad's story was, I knew I was wanted to write, but when I asked him a long time ago, when I started seeing the results, seeing that he was still sober, then I would see him introduce the relationships, the ceremonies. Then I would see the little kids. I mean, the difference between how I grew up with none of that background to all of a sudden, not all of a sudden, but through time, I was seeing more drums at the powwow. Growing up, we had maybe 3 drums at our little traditional powwow. And then I was able to go home and there would be 13 and 20, 21. I'm like, oh my gosh. And that is because of the growth, the return to culture, you know? So he, and I was noticing all these things, all of the family, all of a sudden we didn't have regalia growing up because it was illegal. So all of a sudden I would notice that this many of our family have regalia, and then this many have regalia.
What's regalia?
Our dancing out, our
Okay.
dancing out. What
I assumed that's what it
powwows.
was, but I wasn't positive.
Yeah, somebody, good question, because not all people know. And but I would see more regalia, and I would see more dancing and more singing in our family, and it would make me so proud, because I was in the Navy. I would only be able to see it when I was home on leave, and so I was getting it in bits and pieces, but it looked like it was major growth. You know what I mean? So and then the naming started. I didn't get my Indian name until I was 30, till I was 30, but at least I got it, because growing up, I wasn't given the opportunity, you know, so it was really such a return to culture. And so as I started seeing all the beautiful things happening with regard to the culture, and I knew that he was at the helm of that, and I knew it was that experience that made that happen, I said, Dad, I said, you got to let me tell your story. He's like, no. I said, why not? I think it will help people. He said, no, no. But why? And he said, because I don't want these kids, because alcoholism is bad. He said, I don't want these people to keep drinking, expecting that they're going to have a dream and wake up and be better.
It's not the point of it. I mean, I don't think anybody would think that.
Well, you and I know that, but he was afraid that it would cause more damage than by allowing them to think, oh, I just have to keep drinking in order to have that happen.
I think that sometimes
So
when I have a guest that's had a NDE from suicide, I kind of have a little fear that people are going to think, or, you know, from a drug overdose, that they're going to think, well, I'll do one of those things and then I'll have this wonderful near-death experience that'll help me through life. And that's just not the case. Because near-death experience is so rare, like 10% or something.
Yeah,
population.
and I think it's actually less than that, isn't it? Is it really 10%?
I think
That's
it's around
high.
10. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's kind of amazing. That's pretty cool though.
It's a lot of people.
But anyway, so yeah, it is. So so what I finally said to him was, or he said to me was, I'll know when it's time. And I said, okay. And I was going through, I had PTSD. I shoved it in for the longest time, but I had a trigger from PTSD from the military. And I was going through my own healing process. And so, and journaling, I was writing a lot, journaling as part of my own therapy. And he called me one day, and the tribe had decided, due to budget cuts, to get rid of his position as spiritual advisor. It wasn't a paid position until somebody realized that this man was working till 2 o'clock in the morning, getting up at 5, and all his income from being a school teacher was being spent on driving around all over northern Minnesota, getting his own materials, spending his own time, gas money, delivering, and maybe they should contribute. So they made it his position, that a position, spiritual advisor, just so that they could help out with the cost of providing the medicines and all that to the tribe, which is a very good, very smart thing to do. But he called me on this particular day and said he was, they were cutting the position. And he was so upset because my dad's always fought for keeping the culture and in favor of the government stuff. Like, it's like, if we just return to culture, we don't need the government stuff. We can run things if we just let ourselves, you know what I mean? So that's been a battle for him. So for him, he took that as a, a win from the government, by the government, because they were eliminating the whole spiritual advisor, basically cutting out the tradition again, you know? And he was very upset about that. And so we were talking, and I said, well, Dad, is it time to tell your story? Because we can tell your story and we can help them see, we can help more people see that a return to culture is important. And he said, yep, it's time. So that's how so it was the perfect timing, because I don't think I would have written it as well prior to my own trauma-related recovery. And do you know what I mean?
Mhm.
So yeah, that's how it happened when it did.
What I see, of course, is not just, you know, how a near-death experience changes a life, but how stop being an alcoholic changes your life. I mean, he wouldn't be doing all the things he's done all these years, showing the culture and everything he's been doing, if he hadn't stopped drinking. I mean, he would be dead.
Well, right. So the NDE helped him realize that he had to
Yes.
quit, because that's what he knew. And he always said that. He said that when they sent him back, that he wasn't sure what he was, and it was a process to figure out what he was supposed to do. He just knew whatever it was, he could not do it drinking. He knew that. And that's why that was the first thing that he had to fix. And then it was a matter of figuring out, how am I supposed to help these people? How am I supposed to help my people? He didn't even know that it was teaching the language. He didn't know any of that at first. He was just took it one step at a time, but realized that every single turn, every single opportunity, he knew that, oh, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. You know what I mean? So I pretty beautiful, because talk about stepping into purpose and allowing your purpose to be presented to you, and trusting that your purpose is going to be presented to you. I mean, my God, I think we would all be so lucky if we just actually, it is that way for us. We just don't know it, right? Just trust, surrender to it all, and be cognizant and pay attention, and just move forward as you know you're supposed to be moving forward, you know?
And he could have lied to you that day if you hadn't pried and say, what's going on, you know, he could have said, oh, I did it because I promised you. Promised you I would, and Ben never told you.
The funny thing is, he didn't even remember he promised me. When I wrote the book, that's when he said, you know, babe, I said, you don't remember making that promise, do you? He goes, I thought I did, and I'm glad that I did, but not until you mentioned it. But I remember I remember you telling me you were going in the Navy that day. So that's what he remembers.
Well, you're so fortunate to have such an amazing father, and thank God that you were able to forgive him, to give him another chance, because a lot of people don't. Even though their parents stopped drinking or being abusive, they don't give them that extra chance to prove themselves.
Yeah, and when I first wrote the book, it was just going to be his story. And as I was writing it, I realized that two big things. I needed to add some education in there, because I mentioned some things like boarding schools that people may not have information about. That was thanks to my developmental editor. She helped me. She said, what is a boarding school? I'm like, what? You don't know what a board? She's like, no, I don't know what a boarding school is. I'm 36 years old. I grew up in Oregon. I don't know what a boarding school is.
I was threatened to be sent to upriver, is what they called it when I was a kid, whole time as a teenager. If you do this or that, we're going to send you upriver. It's just like you could not, you know, breathe wrong, or you're going to go upriver. It wasn't boarding school. It was like juvenile detention, I guess they call it now.
Yeah. So that I had to do that. And then it became much more emotionally invested when I put my view on it instead of just tell his story. And so, and it was, I like it. I mean, I know I wrote it, but if I read it, which I have done, just, set it down for a while, pick it back up and read it. I'm like, man, that is a cool story because it's got such a transformation on many levels, and yeah, it's a good read. Warrior Spirit Rising. Can I give a plug for my book?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, when I wrote my memoir, it's the same thing as with you, is it helped my PTSD. Because they became characters instead of this all happened to me and it's tucked away and I'm hiding. They become characters. Me as a child is a character. Me as a teenager is a character now. Me as a young woman, and all these things that happen to these characters.
Yeah.
And it kind of helped it get it outside of me, which is I was wanting to do originally.
Yeah. Very good. Very good. Yeah, so I'm working on my next book is a boarding school.
I'm sorry, that makes me think about your dad and his experience when there was these other characters, these other spirits, they were all him. He seen these things happen almost like a hellish experience, but they were these other spirits.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I just like,
no, that's fine. It's been a wonderful experience. I mean, we've grown even closer. We have had a decent relationship for a long time, but this process has like really solidly cemented our relationship. And that, honestly, what a gift.
Really, that's huge. Because I grew up with the father that never liked me. And when he died, when he was like 60, I stood there at his, watching the casket get lowered in the ground, and I want to take off my high heel and throw it at him and say, why didn't you ever love me?
Wow.
And so that was like 30 years ago. And so, when I hear you finally have that wonderful relationship with your father. And I don't think a lot of people realize how fortunate they are for those positive, either it's mother or father, even grandparents, those close relationships that a lot of us in this has not had, will never have.
Right. Yeah, I you can bet your butt that when I was 12, 13 years old, we never wanted to speak to him again. We would have been happy to never speak to him again. And now all of us, we're all so good with him. And yeah, but we used to hide from him, and it's amazing. And see, so when he read the book, I'll tell you when he read the book. I tried to get him to read the book before I published it, but he said, no, I already told you everything. I said, Dad, it's more than just about you. And I did have him read the introduction. So this is how this won't take long. I read the introduction to him, and it was, that introduction is kind of straightforward and can be brutal. There are parts of the book that can be brutal, that's for sure. But I read that to him, and I said, I got a kick out of Auntie Jackie, because Auntie Jackie read it and she called me and she said, do you have to be so harsh to him? And I told her, I said, well, it's the truth. And my dad said, yep, it's the truth. He said that you have to write the truth. I said, I agree. I said, so I'm going to tell the truth the whole way, Dad. I'm not going to hold anything back, And he said, yep, because that's the way it's supposed to be. I said, okay. So here's the thing, though. When I wrote it, especially the things from my perspective, those are things he didn't know was happening. He didn't know how I was trying to run away, and my sister and I were huddled together and not running away. And he didn't know the angst and the trauma that he really caused when he was drinking, because he was drinking. He was drunk. He didn't know what it was like to sit there at the kitchen table not having any food while he drank his paycheck away. So it was hard for him. He came out and he literally said, well, I read the book.
Yeah. When I told my mom I was writing my memoir, first thing she said was, I bet I sound like Mother of the Year. And then after it come out, she read it, and I kind of scared going to her house. And I walked in. I said, "What'd you think?" And she said, "It's true." She said, "I forgot about a lot of those things until I read it, but it's true." And my aunts and cousins things have read it, and they knew a lot of things, was able to, say, "Yeah, I knew about this, I knew about that." And then they told me things I didn't even know. Things are worse than I ever imagined. But I have two siblings, a brother and a sister, that have not spoke to my mom in over 40 years. Well, about 40 years. And she's 87 in a nursing home, and 40 years is went by. They have not spoke to her because they can't forgive.
Oh, that's so sad. They're
Yeah.
carrying some bad energy. Gosh.
Yeah. So
Yeah, I think that forgiveness was a big theme in my book. Is a big theme in my book. Transformation and forgiveness is big. Hate to love, resentment to pride. I mean,
and I'm so happy you have a happy ending. And I love those endings. A lot of, true story movies I watch, like I Can Only Imagine. And, like I watched that movie, I Can Only Imagine the ending, and where they come together, the father and the son. And I'm like, I wanted that ending for my book. And, I couldn't get it. And, now it's been out 4 years. I still don't have it. And I'm still waiting, hoping for that happy ending with my mother. And I've realized in just the last month, that's not in the cards for me. And it's not in the cards for everybody. Everybody isn't going to get that parent that gets the aha moment and the apology, the awareness.
True.
It's not always going to happen for everybody.
Very
and
true.
I don't think there's really a lot of stories out there like that. They just don't. I remember hearing Oprah saying she went when her mother died for some closure. And I read, what she had said about it, and she didn't get that either. She didn't get that deathbed moment we see on television, where everybody now loves each other. It doesn't always happen.
Right.
People die without that closure.
They do. But the key is, for those of us that are left wishing for that, the key is to figure out a way to do for yourself. Figure out a way to. I just went through this exercise actually. I wrote down every relationship that I ever had, and I took the good and the bad and the lessons and the learned, and I reframed the bad things to make them good things. And then I journaled and journaled and journaled, just journaled, and it was amazing. It was amazing to me what came out in my journaling. Ultimately, though, I had to forgive myself for making those choices. Ultimately, and what a freeing feeling. It took about 4 hours to do that exercise, but it's well worth 4 hours to work through some heavy stuff, some heavy things. Yeah, I just did that. But anyway,
my heavy thing was, my 5-year-old drowning, my first NDE. I was told during my drowning that my family didn't love me. Oh, I didn't know that. And I've had a lot of criticism about that. Say, you wouldn't be told that, like we're only told wonderful things in heaven or something. And I wasn't in heaven. I was all out of body, but I was getting messages, and I was told that, and I knew it, and when I woke up over my brother's shoulder coughing up water, and, my family just, left me alone on the road, went up the house, and oh, wow, it was true. And now I am 60 years old. That was 5 years old. At 60, that was so definitely true. And I even, like I said, I wanted the happy ending at the end of my book, and I called my mom. I was like, why did you always hate me? And she says, I didn't hate you. But she could not say she loved me. She says, I didn't hate you. And I said, well, why did you allow my stepfather and encourage him to abuse me? Well, it's because you ran away. I was 16. I was running for my life. She told me my stepdad was going to end up killing me, and I knew it was true, and because my stepdad didn't like Black people, and I had been kidnapped and raped by a Black man. And so that was more excuse why to abuse her, because she's just trash. And so still here I am, going to visit her at the nursing home and calling her, and still hoping we're going to have this moment like I see on TV, where she's going to say, I'm sorry and I love you, and I'm sorry I couldn't do this, and I should. It's never going to happen. But so yeah, people have these wonderful stories, the wonderful endings. I mean, I'm so glad you have one that your dad has. made such a wonderful change in his life. And my mom actually had a near-death experience. I think it was, she had brain surgery, and she told me things, and she was told at the end, now this is, or they would show her things in heaven and say, no, that's not for you. And show her something else. She's, I want to do that. And they say, that's not for you. And then they told her twice. She's had experience where she was told, now go back and be a nicer person.
Wow.
And I said, Mom, are you going to? Nope. So, I mean, we all have a choice.
Yeah, we do. In hearing you say that, I was going to offer you something, and I can't remember where I was going, because then you said something else, and I thought about something. I think it has something to do with oh, yes, it is. Have you ever read Neil Donald Walsh's Little Soul in the Sun? You might want to read that.
Little Soul in the Sun.
Little Soul in the Sun, because but I can tell you the synopsis right now, a summary right now, if you like. But I've done a lot of spiritual work myself, especially I've done a lot of spiritual work, especially my healing, and I've transcended and through meditation and breath work and all kinds of things. And I've gotten lots of messages, and one of the messages that I got probably about a year ago is that we all make agreements prior to our earthly experience, and we're here to learn, and to also just kind of absorb many of these good human experiences that we can, and sometimes bad, but we're here to learn, so because our life is going to be our human experience is going to be full of lessons. And when I got that download, because it was definitely a download, I didn't understand it fully, because I was like, all right, well, I'm not exactly sure what that means, but that means that we are here to just experience the thing I took away. We're here to experience all the good that we can while we're here. Because as souls, especially with what my dad has said in his experience and the things that I've seen since then, these souls do not have facial entities, but you can see the souls, and these souls are and then the movie Soul came out, right? And that woman, the young girl, was eating the pizza, and she loved how the pizza, and that's what hit me. I was like, so when we come to this earth, we just got to experience as much as we can. But what about the bad stuff? Why are we here to experience the bad stuff? Like a lot of us do. And so I didn't really quite understand that piece of it. I understood that eating pizza, the love, the hugs, the touching, things you can't do when you're your entity, but that you take back. So holding a loved one, you'll always have that feeling in your soul. You'll always carry it with you. So I understood those pieces, but I didn't understand the bad stuff. And then just a month ago, I read The Little Soul in the Sun, and it helped me very much to realize why bad things happen to people, and it allows me to just understand more. And I think when, my whole thing, part of the reason why my job is to tell Native American stories. I've been told that. I know that's my job. And when, and I still do talks. I talk with people, I do events and all that. And people ask me, what are you doing this for? I'm doing this for, especially Native American boarding school. I'm doing it for education, because education leads to understanding, and understanding leads to forgiveness. Forgiveness leads to healing, and healing leads to what we're all supposed to be doing, is loving. So without these pieces, we can't get to the full love. And so if someone's stuck in a mode of not understanding why they're hurting, it's really important to figure that piece out so they can move on to the forgiveness piece. And so that book really helps people understand this part. So definitely recommend that to your readers and to yourself, because if you're saying it, there's a lot more people that are feeling it.
I went to bed after the drowning that night at 5 years old, and I realized that I had to take care of myself now. And I was looking through a little nursery rhyme book, and I come to the old woman lived in the shoe, and I looked at the picture of the beds, and I thought, because an angel had spoke to me right after the drowning, and said that I would have a lot of love someday. And I thought, maybe this is what the angel meant. I'd have a lot of children. And then I thought, I want to love unloved children like me. And so I was the youngest foster parent after I started having my own kids. And I ended up having 60 foster kids, and I did therapeutic foster care. So I had the hardest behavior problem kids.
Yeah.
And we adopted 10 kids altogether. And so, you know, you look back as you get older and you just see how all these pieces just come together. And it's like your destiny. It was my destiny. And so that helps me forgive, because I feel like, well, it was my destiny that I be born into this family. Right. And that I come out of it the way that I am, that I'm sitting here now talking to you. So
right. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. But yeah, the book is beautiful. It's written for children, but it really is
your book is for, or this book you're talking about is for children.
What I'm talking about, yeah. But it really helps people, especially if they're new to the world of spirituality, because sometimes these concepts are hard to take, you know. So and that's why NDEs, I think, are hard for people to understand as well, because they think that, well, they think it's crazy. They're not open enough to understand that, yes, these things have happened for years and they continue to happen, and they're a bridge between this world and the next. But that's really hard for them to grasp.
Is it hard for the Native community, do you think, to understand your really?
I think it's less hard, but my dad, even though the book is written, I haven't promoted it in the Native communities. Well, COVID shut a lot down, and so I've had to rely on online sales, and you know, it's and all that. But I mean, it's not a New York Times bestseller yet, but
it's doing well.
Your
book is doing well. My book's not. It's just a print on demand. Like, I didn't have a publisher. I mean, I had a publisher, but it was just a print on demand publisher. So I'm just it's my fate.
Yeah, well,
it's wonderful though. I know it is.
Yeah, yeah. I did self-publishing as well, because I wanted control. I wanted to control the whole thing. I didn't want anybody to try to tell me that it needed to be. I mean, I'm open to suggestions, but it's taken another year and a half to publish because it took me a long time to write it.
I told my editor, I said, no ghostwriting. She kept wanting to change things. And I said, no, this has to be truthful, every single word, because I have very strong long-term memory, especially with PTSD, you know, and I remember things exact conversations. And I said, there would be no sense of writing this book if it wasn't true. What would be the purpose of bringing out all this horrible stuff in my family, my life? If it wasn't true, there would be absolutely no reason. And so she did. She finally she tried a couple more times to change something. I don't know, you don't. So we got it at truthful to my word.
Very good. Very good. Okay, well, listen, so thank you so very much for the opportunity. And if you could send a link to where it's going to be,
I will.
That would be great. And again, Warrior Spirit Rising by Dianna Good Sky.
Okay. I should have this uploaded to YouTube by today. So you probably get this evening. Okay. Thank you.
Oh, it's on. Oh, this is on YouTube? The video?
Not yet. This is pre-recorded. This is pre-recorded.
Okay. Oh, so I am going to be seen.
You didn't know? Yeah, this is pre-recorded. And I
thought a podcast was just audio, but I don't care. I'm fine.
Oh, you're great. No. Okay. Okay. Is it all right?
Yeah, it is. It's fine.
Okay. Okay. Well, thank you so much. I love talking to you. It's been so nice for me to talk to you.
Very enjoyable. Thank you again.
Bye-bye.
Bye.